He knew the moment the stage door swung open that the letters had lied to him. Tate Calloway had ordered a Meek bride. He'd been plain about it in every line he'd paid the matrimonial agent to carry east. A quiet woman, church-going, content with a still house and a hard country, no fuss and no noise. Because Tate had built his whole life out of the absence of fuss and noise, and did not intend to invite either onto his ranch now. He stood at the edge of the Alder Gap Road in his one clean shirt, hat in his hands, braced for a mouse. What came down off the stage was no mouse. She came down backward, arguing over her shoulder with the driver about the handling of a wooden case, and when she turned around, she had a fiddle case under one arm, and a hat pin listing sideways, and a look in her eye like a mare that has decided the fence is a suggestion. She was dust to the knees, and her traveling dress was good cloth worn hard, and she found Tate in the little crowd at the depot, the way a compass finds north. "You'll be Calloway," she said. It was not a question. "You're taller than your handwriting." Tate opened his mouth. Nothing came out of it. "I'm Josephine Merrick, Joe, and before you say the thing your face is trying to say, yes, I know I'm not who you sent for. The Ferris girl took a fright and married her deacon 3 days before the coach. The agency had my name and a paid fare, and no wish to give either back, so," she shifted the fiddle, "here I am. You can be sour about it on the ride out. It's a free country and a long road." Somewhere behind Tate, the depot loafers had stopped pretending not to listen. "I asked," he said, when he found words, "for a quiet woman. And I asked the Lord for a rich one with soft hands, and here we both stand disappointed on a Tuesday." She hefted her own trunk before he could reach it, staggered, and set it down with a thump that raised dust. "Are we going to your ranch, or are we going to stand here entertaining the town?" The town, Tate saw, was very much entertained. He drove her out to the ranch in a silence he'd meant as punishment, and which she plainly took as scenery. She looked at everything: the horses in the far pens, the gap in the blue hills the place was named for, the hawk hung on the wind over the hayflat, and she said, once, quietly, "It's fine country," and he almost forgot to keep being angry. "You could turn me around," she said, halfway out, watching the road unroll. "Drive me right back to the depot. I'd not blame you. A man pays for one thing and gets another. He's owed his complaint." She said it lightly, but he heard the thing underneath it, the thing that had gone very still and careful, and he understood that she was giving him the chance to do the cruel thing quickly, rather than by inches. "I don't turn a team around in the heat of the day," he said. "It's hard on the horses." She looked at him sidelong. "That's not a no. It's not a yes either." He clicked to the team. "It's a supper and a night's sleep, and we'll see. That's the most anybody's owed on a first meeting." She sat back at that, and something in her shoulders let down half an inch, and neither of them said anything more the rest of the way. But he noticed she stopped holding her fiddle case quite so much like a shield. He put her in the house and took himself to the barn, and that, he told himself, was that. He would drive her back to the stage road come Monday and get his fee back, or the reason why. A man could not build a still life around a woman who'd argued with a stagecoach. Joe Merrick lay awake that first night in a stranger's spare room and did not cry, because crying was a thing she did in private, and there was no private on a ranch a body didn't know yet. She had come west with a fiddle and $40, and a hard, plain reason she'd told no one. A man back east who thought a woman was a thing you improved by breaking, and a night she'd left with what she could carry, rather than be improved any further. She'd taken the paid fare because it went far, and it went now. She had not expected the tall, silent rancher to be kind. She had only hoped he would not be the other thing. By morning she'd made up her mind to earn her keep until he threw her out, so no man could ever say Joe Merrick took a thing she hadn't paid for. Tate came in from the pens at noon to find his house changed. The stove was blacked. The window that had been painted shut for 3 years stood open with a spring breeze coming through it. There was bread rising under a cloth, and coffee that did not taste like a punishment. And Joe Merrick was on her knees in his yard, with her sleeves shoved up, mending the sag in his garden fence with wire and a fence tool she'd found in the barn and figured out on her own. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know I don't." She didn't look up. That's rather the point of doing it. He watched her a while. She was doing it wrong in one particular and right in every other. And after a minute he crouched down without a word and showed her the trick of the wire twist, his scarred hands over her chapped ones for half a breath. And she watched and got it at once and said, "Well, that's better." And something in Tate's chest that had been latched a long time gave a small, unwilling creak. He drove her into Alder Gap that Saturday for flour and nails, and the town, which had already had its story, turned out to have another chapter in mind. The women by the mercantile porch went quiet in the particular way that is louder than talk. One of them, the storekeeper's wife, said just loud enough that she'd heard Calloway sent east for a Christian girl and got sent a saloon fiddler instead. And wasn't that a shame? And what could a man do with the like of that? Joe's chin came up. Tate saw the old fight climb into her and saw, too, the cost of it. The way a woman gets tired of being a story told on porches. He had meant to say nothing, as was his custom. Instead, he set the flour sack in the wagon bed, turned around, and said, into the quiet, that Miss Merrick had mended in 1 week, a fence he'd let sag 3 years, gentled a horse 2 grown men had given up as ruined, and made his coffee fit to drink for the first time since his mother died, and that if that was what a wrong bride did to a place, he'd thank the good Lord for the mix-up and be on his way. It was, by a wide margin, the longest speech anyone in Alder Gap had ever heard Tate Calloway give. The porch had nothing to say back to it, and Joe, climbing up onto the wagon seat beside him, looked at the silent rancher with something new in her face. Not the wariness, not the wit, but a startled, disbelieving warmth, as if she had just felt a door open in a wall she'd been certain went all the way around. "You didn't have to do that," she said, low as they pulled out. "I know I didn't," Tate said, watching the road. "That's rather the point of doing it. It was the horse that undid the rest of him." He had a young gray in the round pen, a fine-boned filly out of his best mare, and she was ruined in the mouth by a hired man he'd since run off, jumpy, cold-backed, prone to a blind panic that had already put one man in the dirt. Tate had been working her slow for a month and getting nowhere, and he'd about decided she was a loss, which grieved him more than he'd say, because Tate Calloway loved horses in the exact place other men kept the words they never said out loud. He came around the barn on the 4th morning and stopped cold. Joe was inside the round pen. She was not supposed to be inside the round pen. She was sitting on the ground in the middle of it, with her back to the gray filly, doing nothing at all. No rope, no whip, no hurry. Just sitting in the dirt, playing her fiddle low and slow, some old sad reel worn down to a lullaby, and the ruined filly stood not 4 feet behind her, with her head dropped low, ears loose, breathing the music. Tate did not move. He hardly dared breathe. Joe let the tune trail off. She didn't turn around. After a moment, the filly took a step, and then another, and put her soft gray nose down against Joe's shoulder, and Joe reached up without looking and laid a flat hand along the mare's jaw. Easy, the way you'd greet someone you'd known all your life. "She's not mean," Joe said quietly, "to the horse or the man, or both. She's just been handled by people who mistook fear for stubbornness." Now she turned, and found Tate at the rail, and for once, there was no edge on her at all. "I had a horse like her back home. And a couple of people. You can't break the fear out of a thing. You have to bore it out. Sit close enough, long enough, doing nothing it needs to run from, till it decides on its own you're safe." A small, tired smile. Takes patience. And a tune. Tate Calloway looked at the fiery, sharp-tongued, wholly wrong woman sitting in the dirt of his round pen with his ruined filly's head in her lap, and understood with a plain man's plain certainty that he had ordered exactly the opposite of what he needed, and had been sent exactly what he needed instead. He did not send her back on Monday. He did not, in fact, mention the stage road again, and neither did she. And the not mentioning grew into a thing with roots. She fought with him, over the price of feed, over whether a fence post wanted setting deeper, over his habit of eating standing up, like a man expecting to flee. She had opinions the way the sky had weather, but the fights were clean, and they always ended, and he came to see that her temper was never cruelty. It was just the sound a strong thing made when it had spent years being told to be small. And she saw him too. She saw that his silence was not coldness, but a kind of care held very carefully. That he blacked her a new stovepipe damper without a word, because he'd noticed hers smoked. That he began, by summer, to eat sitting down at the table across from her, because she'd made the table a place worth sitting at. The reckoning came in a night of wind and drumming hail, when the gray filly and 3 others broke the far pen and ran wild into the storm, and Tate went out into the black after them, because they'd founder or drown in the wash if they weren't turned. Joe saw the lantern go bobbing out into the dark, and did the thing no meek bride would have done. She pulled on his spare oilskin, took up her fiddle wrapped in a slicker, and went out after him. She found him in the wash, thrown, his ankle wrong under him, and the panicked filly wheeling above him in the hail, too crazed with fear to be caught, and too close to strike. The water was coming down out of the high country in a brown rush, climbing the cut banks fast, already past Tate's knees where he lay. And every time he tried to drag himself up the loose bank, the noise and the movement sent the gray rearing again, hooves flashing a hand's breadth from his head. A lesser woman would have screamed and spooked her onto the fallen man. Joe did not scream. She saw the whole terrible arithmetic of it in one lightning-lit instant. The rising water, the man who could not move, the horse whose fear would kill him if it wasn't quieted, and she made the only calculation that could save him. She wedged her back against the cut bank, out of the flood, unwrapped the fiddle from its slicker with hands gone numb, and she played. That same low reel, thin and stubborn against the roar of the storm, breaking and catching, a small human sound thrown up against all that black water and wind. She played it into the filly's terror, the way you'd hold a lamp into a dark room. And slow, too slow, with the water climbing Tate's chest now, the wild thing in the horse gave way to the old memory of safety. The rearing stopped. The gray's head came down. Her legs went still. "Now, Tate," Joe said, not stopping the bow. "Come to me. Slow. She'll hold." He came. He dragged himself up the streaming bank an inch at a time, while she played him home, and when he was clear of the water, she got her arm under his shoulder and hauled him the rest of the way, and the gray filly followed her up out of the wash, like a shadow through the driving hail, gentle as a lamb, because Joe Merrick had never once, in her whole hard life, mistaken a frightened thing for a bad one. They got the horses in. They got themselves in, soaked and shaking, and Tate sat on the hearth with his ruined ankle propped, and the fire climbing, and looked at his wrong bride wringing stormwater from her hair, and he said the most words she had ever heard him string together at once. "I sent east for a quiet woman," he said, "because I thought quiet was the same as peace. I was a fool. You are the loudest, most contrary, most stubborn creature ever to argue with a stagecoach, and you went into a flood tonight with a fiddle to pull me out, and I have not had one peaceful day since you stepped off that stage." He looked at his hands, then at her. "I don't want it back, the quiet. I want the noise. I want you, Josephine Merrick, temper and fiddle and all of it. If you'll have a plain hard man who ordered wrong and got lucky. Joe Merrick, who did not cry in front of people, sat down beside him on the hearth and let him see her do it, just this once. "You didn't order wrong," she said, wiping her face and laughing at herself for it. "You just didn't know your own handwriting. And for the record, Tate Calloway, I'd have gone into that flood for you if you'd been the surliest, most tongue-tied man in the whole territory, which, near as I can tell, you very nearly are." They were married in Alder Gap that fall, and the whole entertained town came, and Joe played her fiddle at her own wedding, while Tate stood grinning, like a man who'd been let in on a joke the world had been keeping from him. And on the still winter evenings after, the house that had been built around the absence of noise filled up instead with it, the fiddle, and the fights that always ended, and, in time, the smaller sounds of a family maid, and Tate Calloway, who had asked for silence, sat at his table across from the wrong woman, who'd turned out to be the only right thing, and could not for the life of him remember why he had ever wanted his house so quiet.